Really, the air nomads are the only ones who really said gay rights. And then the water tribe said, gay rights if you mind your business. And then we hate Sozu. I feel like this shirt is so water tribe. My friend stitched these whales. Shout out to my friend Maggie. Chapter 9, Desperate Measures. What happened? I don't know. Okay. So now that they're kind of like, Kyoshi low-key might be the avatar, now they're giving her all this like fancy food, and she eats with like as a noble, and then they do Heidan and Genju have her do this firebending test where they put this like tinder under her nose, and theoretically she's just supposed to breathe in normally and then it lights on fire, and that's how you know she's a firebender, but it didn't work, and so they're like and she's like, didn't Yoon pass the test? And they're just like, and then she's stressed, and then Yoon finds her in the library and they're just chatting, and he's like, I know it's not your fault, and she's like, Rongi doesn't, and he's like, she'll come around, and then he's like, she's like, well, what would happen if it is me? And he's like, well, everything we've done over the past however many years it's been, like, would kind of be null and void. So, yoinks. And she's like, oh no. And then he's like, I keep saying, and then he's like, and then she's like, are there fire lilies? What? And then we find out about this whole moment that happened between them a while back when she was, I don't know, arranging fire lilies or something, and his head was in her lap and they almost kissed. Whoa. Anyways, I'm stressed because this chapter, and someone a couple seconds ago just said, this chapter, man, this chapter. That's what my mom's been saying all week. And she said it today. She was like, this chapter. And I was like, oh God. I said, I'm afraid. And she said, you should be. And now I'm very, very afraid. Boop. 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 Chapter 10. The Spirit. Master Kelsang needs more time to heal, Genju said over his shoulder. In the meantime, we can perform a spiritual exercise that might shed light on our situation. Think of it as a little Earthbenders-only outing. He adjusted Peng Peng's course, the breeze blowing her tufts of fur in a new direction. The group was the unusual combination of Genju, Yoon, and Kyoshi. They'd borrowed Kelsang's bison, leaving Rongi and Heidan behind. There should have been nothing wrong with the concept of 3 Earth Kingdom natives bonding over their shared nationality, but Kyoshi found it unnerving. Without Rongi or her mother present, it felt like they were sneaking away to do something illicit. She glanced at the terrain below. By her best reckoning, they were somewhere near the Shishan Mountains that ran along the southeastern edge of the continent, the same ones that the Earth King incorrectly considered a sufficient barrier to waterborne threats, like the pirates of the Eastern Sea. Kyoshi still wasn't fully comfortable addressing Genju in a casual manner, so it fell on Yoon to ask what the point of this trip was. Sifu, he said cautiously, an idea forming in his head. Is the reason we're going to a remote area because we're trying to invoke the Avatar State? His master scoffed. Don't be ridiculous. What's the Avatar State? Kyoshi whispered to Yoon. Genju's sharp ears intercepted her question. It's a tool, he said, and a defense mechanism. A higher state of being designed to empower the current avatar with the skills and knowledge of all the past ones. It allows for the summoning of vast cosmic energies and nearly impossible feats of bending. That sounded definitive enough. Why wouldn't they try it after the failures they'd suffered? But if the avatar can't maintain conscious control over so much power, then their bending can go berserk, causing elemental destruction on a grand scale, Genju continued. They'd turn into a human natural disaster. The first time Korok practiced entering the Avatar State, we went to a small, uninhabited atoll. Atoll? Atoll? Mom? Atoll? Both. My mom says both. Both is good. That means. So we wouldn't hurt anyone. What happened? Yoon said. Well, after his eyes stopped glowing and he came down from floating 20 feet in the air inside a sphere of water, the island wasn't there anymore, Genju said. The rest of us survived by the skin of our teeth. So, no, we're not triggering the avatar state. I shudder to think what would happen if an Earth avatar started hurling land masses left and right with abandon. He took them lower. The westward side of the mountainous ridge was dotted with empty mining settlements. Scapes of brown dust spread from the operating sites like an infection, eating into the tree line and displacing the natural vegetation. Kyoshi looked for signs that the land was growing back, but the scars were permanent. The wild grasses kept a strict cordon around the areas touched by the miners. Genju set Peng Peng down for a landing in the center of the mud-walled hamlet. Whoever originally earthbent the structures into shape had been so sloppy that it seemed intentional, as if to remind the occupants that they weren't going to stay long. Kyoshi was surprised they didn't cause any further collapses by jumping down from the bison. This is an important locus of earthen spiritual energy, Genju said. Yoon dug his toe into the dust as he surveyed their surroundings. It looks more like a wasteland. It's both. We're here to commune with a particular spirit roused from its slumber by the devastation. What if it's Heibai? I don't know if it's Heibai, but what if it's Heibai? It's probably not Heibai. I'm hoping one of you can help ease its suffering. But talking with spirits is no guarantee, Yoon said. I've read of past avatars who've had trouble with it. And then there's people like Master Kelsong who have been able to communicate with the spirits effortlessly at times. And Jinora. I didn't say the method was perfect, Genju snapped. If it was, I'd have used it on you long ago. Yoon frowned and bit back more questions. Kyoshi was glad that he shared her apprehension at the very least. The desolate town was eerie, the bones of a once living thing. But on the other hand, she was slightly comforted by the knowledge that it would all be over soon. She knew nothing about spirits. In her opinion, being spiritual simply meant acknowledging the power of forces you couldn't see and coming to terms with the fact that you didn't have control over every aspect of your life. The rituals of food and incense placed at sacred shrines were gestures to that worldview. Nothing more, nothing less. The stories about strange translucent animals and talking plants might have been true, but they weren't for her. The avatar was the bridge between the human world and the spirit world, and whatever test Genju had in mind would settle the matter. Yoon would glow with energy or some other final proof, and she would lie there, inert, listening for sounds she couldn't hear. After leaving Peng Peng with some dried oats to chew, they walked up the slope of the mountain on a tiny path that ran alongside a gouged-out sluice canal. It was steep going, and Yoon remembered there was a faster way to climb. You know, I could make a lift and— Don't, Genju said. Eventually, the incline revealed a large terrace carved into the mountain. It was bigger than the entire settlement below, and it had been constructed with more care. It was perfectly level, and empty post holes indicated that it once held some very heavy equipment. Go sit in the middle, Genju told them. Kyoshi felt the same prickle on the back of her neck as she did when stepping onto the iceberg with Tagaka. It made little sense, seeing as how she was surrounded by her native element. Come on, Yoon said to her, let's get this over with. He seemed to have a better understanding of how this might escalate. She followed him to the center of the terrace. It's not the solstice, but it is almost twilight, Genju said. The time of day when spiritual activity is at its highest. I will guide you two in meditation. Yoon, help her if she needs it. Kyoshi had never meditated before. She didn't know which leg you folded over the other or how your hands were supposed to touch, fists pressed together or thumb and forefinger. You've basically got it, Yoon said after they sat down. Tuck your tailbone in a bit more and don't hunch your shoulders. He stayed facing her, taking up his own pose not too far off. She could have reached out and poked him. Genju produced a small brazier and a stick of incense, which he placed between them. Someone help me light this with firebending, he said. They stared blankly at him. It was worth a shot, Genju said. Can you imagine? Kyoshi's just like, yeah, okay. And then what? Okay. It was worth a shot, Genju said. He lit the incense with a precious sulfur match and backed away until he reached the edge of the terrace, positioned like the high mark of positioned like the high mark of a sundial. The air took on a sweet, medicinal note. Both of you close your eyes and don't open them, Genju said. Let go of your energy. Let it spill from you. We want to let the spirit get a taste of it, so to speak, so it knows it can come forth. Kyoshi didn't know how to control her energy, but if Genju was telling her to throw away the idea of containing herself, to stop minimizing the space she took up, to let herself grow and rise to her full dimensions, it felt wonderful. The next exhalation she made seemed to go on forever, drawing from a reservoir inside her that had no end. Her sense of balance ran wild, the pull of the earth coming from each and every direction in turn. She swayed within the stillness of her own body. Her eyelids were a theater of the blank. A rasping noise came from the mountain, the sound of millstones with no grain between them. Don't open your eyes, Genju said softly. Hear sounds, smell smells. Take note of them naturally and let them pass without opening your eyes. The breeze picked up for a moment, dispersing the incense smoke. In the time it took to settle back down, Kyoshi thought she detected a whiff of something damp, almost fungal. It wasn't so atrocious as it was familiar. Familiar to whom, she thought, giggling silently as the incense took over again. You know what would be funny, she said? If it was, neither of us. Kyoshi, Yoon said. His voice sounded slurred. I need to tell you something. Something important. Me and you. She tried to speak again, but her tongue was too big for it. Genju hadn't told them to shut up yet. That was weird. Genju was master shut up. Was he okay? She had to... Sorry. I keep looking ahead because I'm so, I'm stressed. I'm not looking ahead. Okay. Was he okay? She had to check if he was okay. It was her duty as a member of his household. She disobeyed and peeked. Yoon was meditating peacefully. Had he spoken at all, or had she imagined it? She tried to turn her head toward Genju, but went the wrong way, looking at the mountain instead. A hole had been opened in the rock, a tunnel of pitch darkness. In its depths, a great glowing eyeball stared back at her. Then there's a little break. Her shriek caught in her throat. She tried to scramble away, but her muscles failed her as if her joints had been sliced by a butcher. I'm so stressed. Nothing connected to anything. The eye floating in the mountain was the size of a wagon wheel. It had a sickly luminescent tinge of green. A web of pulsing veins, I don't like this, gripped it tightly from behind, giving the sphere an angry appearance, as if it would burst under its own pressure at any moment. It swiveled over to look at her, her futile struggle catching its attention. Yoon! Her mind screamed. He wasn't moving. His breathing was slow and labored. Genju was unfazed by the horrific spirit before them. Father Glowworm, he called out in greeting. That sounds so funny. A cordial, mellifluent voice rumbled from deep within the mountain, the echo concentrated by the walls of the tunnel. Architect, it's been so long. The eye darted between the three of them. What have you brought me? A question. The spirit sighed, a low, nauseating hum that Kyoshi felt in her bones. That chatty little upstart Ko. Not every human thinks they can march up to the oldest and wisest of us and demand answers. I thought you had more respect, architect. Genju stiffened. This is an important question. One of these children is the Avatar. I need you to tell me which one. The spirit laughed, and it felt like the earth bounced. Oh my, the physical world is in poor shape indeed. You do know I'll need their blood. Kyoshi thrashed back and forth, but whatever Genju had drugged them with, he drugged them with that. Now I understand. So I was like, why can't she move? What's going on? But whatever Genju had drugged them with rendered her flailing into mere twitches of movement, her cries into halting breaths. Yoon's eyes opened, but only by the smallest degree. I know, Genju said. I've read Kuruk's private journals. But you've tangled with many of the Avatar's past lives. I must have the unerring judgment of a great and ancient spirit such as yourself. A carpet of slime spilled from the hole in the mountain, flying over the terrace. I hate this, guys. I'm so uncomfortable. It was the same moldy, rotting green as the eye, and it reached toward Yoon and Kyoshi in tendrils, the shadows of fingers against a curtain. There was a scraping noise against the stone floor. It came from pointed flecks of debris floating in the wetness, bone-yellow roots and crowns. The slime was full of human teeth. Kyoshi was so scared that she wanted to die. Her heart, her lungs, her stomach had been turned into instruments of torture, clawing and biting against each other like frenzied animals. She wanted to reach the void, pass into oblivion, anything to end this terror. As the ooze reached for her knee, Yoon opened his eyes. Summoning his strength, he lunged at Kyoshi, shoving her away, throwing his body between her and the spirit. He choked in surprise as the rasping slime shot underneath his clothing. A damp crimson spot bloomed on the back of his shirt. Kyoshi's foot lay next to the brazier of incense. A meager contribution after what Yoon did, but she screamed with her whole body this time instead of her vocal cords and kicked at the little bronze vessel. The burning ash landed on the slime and fizzled out. The plasm nearest them shrank from the heat, and the spirit hissed angrily. Yoon struggled to his knees beside her. "I'm surprised you can move," Genju said to him, more impressed than anything else. "Poison training," Yoon spat through clenched jaws. "With Sifu Amak, remember? Or did you forget every darker exercise you put me through?" They were distracted from the slime regrouping, wrapping around Kyoshi's ankle until it latched on tight and ground away, sanding her skin off with the rows of teeth. This is so gross, and I'm so uncomfortable. Her blood formed clouds inside the living mucus. I'm literally going to put like a trigger warning when I edit this and put this on YouTube. It's just nasty. Yoon saw her writhe in pain. He grabbed her hand and tried to pull her away from the spirit. Their palms clasped hard enough that Kyoshi felt their bones roll over each other, but the tendril held her fast, tasting her, lapping at her wound. "It's this one," the spirit said. "The girl. She's the avatar." Kyoshi and Yoon were looking at each other in the eye when it happened. When she saw Yoon's spirit break inside him, he had been lying to her with his body and his smile and his words the whole time. He thought it was him, truly and utterly. He'd never once entertained the notion that it might not be him. Any kindness and warmth he'd shown to Kyoshi since the iceberg hadn't been signs of his acceptance. They'd been layers of armor that he'd furiously assembled to protect himself. I'd like to file a complaint against FCE for making me emotional. And that armor had failed, piece by piece. Kyoshi saw the only Yoon she'd ever known, the boy who was the avatar, slew, and flake into nothingness. His mantle had been stripped from his shoulders, and the shape underneath was merely wind. He let go of her. Genju was on top of them in a flash. He sliced at the branch of slime with a sharp, precise little wall, and using the care of his own 2 hands, dragged Kyoshi away to safety. Just Kyoshi. He laid her on the ground and turned around, but it was too late. The spirit slime reared into the air between them and Yoon, a snake guarding its prey. The eyeball in the tunnel swelled with fury. "You call me forth, ask for my boon, and then assault me?" Its roar nearly shattered the bones in Kyoshi's ears. "Yoon," she tried to shout, "run, fight, save yourself. The avatar, it never meant anything." Genju took an earthbending stance, cautiously settling his feet the way a swordsman might slowly go for his blade. Whoa, the lighting got weird. "I couldn't risk you taking your revenge on Kuruk's reincarnation. You had your blood, Father Glowworm. Your price has been paid. I'm raising it!" Instead of attacking the 2 of them, the tendril wrapped around Yoon from neck to hip. His face was as pale as clay. He wouldn't move his limbs. Every fear Kyoshi had of taking from him what he treasured most had come to pass in a thundering instant. There was only one more thing left for him to lose. No, Kyoshi sobbed. Please, no. The spirit pulled, and Yoon flew backward into the tunnel, disappearing into the darkness. Genju! This is all Genju's fault. As Genju punched his fist upward... What? Sorry, I read ahead. As Genju punched his fist upward to seal the passage shut once more with the solid mountain, Kyoshi found her voice again. She screamed, pure fire. There's a pause. I'm going to drink some water. Oh my God. The flame shot out of her mouth like the rage of a dragon in a single explosive burst. It doused the terrace. There's still 8 pages left of this chapter, you guys. It doused the terrace and rendered swaths of lingering ooze into blackened, flaking char. But the tunnel was closed. Her fire washed impotently against the mountainside until it petered out entirely. Oh my God, this is so much. Kyoshi stumbled to her feet, barely able to see past her sticky eyelids. The inside of her mouth was blistered. Well, yeah. She could sense Genju's presence in front of her, looming. I'm sorry, he said. This could have been avoided if you had... She surged forward and tackled him off the edge of the terrace. The trip down this time was worse than the iceberg. Kyoshi lost her grip on Genju the instant her shoulder smashed into a withered, hardened tree root. She tumbled wildly, tail over tea kettle, and came to a stop at the bottom of the slope. Ignoring the pain, she looked around for Genju. He wasn't to be found in the thin scrub surrounding the base of the mountain. She snapped her head upward at the sound of stone moving. The earthbending master descended casually, stepping down a flight of stairs that he created himself. Where a more orthodox bender would simply raise a solid platform from the ground, Genju gathered planks of stone and assembled them at will beneath his feet, using the same technique he'd reached Tagaka's ships with. It looked like the earth itself was bowing to him, prostrating under his immense power. I'm so stressed. Kyoshi spotted a boulder behind him large enough for her to lift and rooted her feet to the ground. She pulled it toward them, not caring that she was also in its path. Genju didn't bother turning his head. He reached behind him with one arm, and the room-sized rock split against its... split along its grain, letting him pass through the gap. The 2 half-spheres kept going and narrowly missed clipping Kyoshi as well. She forced down a yelp as they collided with the ground behind her. Genju looked at her with the same thoughtful expression he once reserved for Yoon. I have so many opinions. I'll have to teach you to do more than simply go big, he said. Kyoshi tried the only other basic tactic she knew of, breaking the opponent's foundation. She aimed her intent at the base of his stairs. She'd take them out along with a huge chunk of the slope. But after rooting herself again and throwing the mother of all arrow punches into the mountainside, the only movement she got was a geyser of dust. The stairs barely trembled. She tried again and again. Kyoshi was taking deeper stances now, spiraling his arms in time with hers, and suddenly she knew why. He was reading her, smothering each movement of earth she attempted, nulling her out. She was a child pulling on a door an adult was holding closed. Genju stopped right in front of her, his platform raising him up so that he was eye level with her. Aside from the dust on his clothes, he could have been leaving a meeting in his house. She'd been unable to touch him in the slightest. Kyoshi. Let me read that again. Kyoshi, he said, with a warmth that made her sick to her stomach. You are the Avatar. Don't you know what that means? The responsibility that you now have? He ran a hand through his hair and bared his teeth like he regretted what kind of bushes he'd planted in his garden. Kyoshi, I'm not a fool, and neither are you. We're not going to pretend you'll ever truly forgive me for what happened here. What I'm asking you to do is weigh our loss against the future of the world. Don't let Yoon's sacrifice be in vain. Embrace your duty and let me teach you. Yoon's sacrifice? Our loss? Her teeth crushed fresh wounds into her lips. She'd thought she'd known hate before. Hate had been a hollowness inside her, the dull ache that she'd been forced to cradle as she'd stumbled through the alleys of Yokoya, dizzy with hunger and sickness. Hate had been reserved for her own flesh and blood, but now she understood. True hatred was knife-edged and certain. a scale that begged for perfect balance. Yoon lay on one side of the fulcrum. Her only responsibility in this life, as far as she was concerned, was to even the weight. She swore to herself, one way or another, she was going to know what Genju looked like when he did lose everything he held dear. Kyoshi hurled a fire fist, a move she knew nothing about. But whatever firebending she had in her had been used up. Sorry, my nose is weird. It came out as a normal punch, stopping short of his face. Seeing her so desperate to harm him cracked his mask of serenity. He frowned an ugly frown and clenched his fingers. 2 small discs of stone slammed into Kyoshi's wrists from the left and right. It happened so fast she didn't have time to flinch. The stones shaped themselves around her hands and joined each other in front of her body, forming a set of thick shackles. They were as snug as a bone doctor's splint and as unbreakable as iron. Ah! The bands of rock rose into the air, taking her with them. Her shoulders clicked painfully under her own weight, and she writhed like an insect caught on sticky paper, madly kicking her feet without purchase. Genju held her like that, a carcass for inspection, before slamming her back down. The stone shackles merged with the ground, and she struggled on all fours. He'd forced her into a full kowtow, a student's posture of submission to their master. Had you the essentials of earthbending, you could free yourself, Genju said. You've gone neglected long enough, Kyoshi. You're weak. Her palms sunk deeper into the ground the more she tried to resist. There was no denying that he was right. She was weak, too weak to fight him the way she needed to. The distance between them was simply too great. So much wasted time, Genju said. I could have taught you sooner, if only I hadn't been distracted by that little swindler. That he wasn't done being cruel to Yoon was a final kick to her gut. It was incomprehensible. She couldn't keep the tears from flowing down her face. How could you say that? She screamed. He worshipped you and you used him. You think I used him? Genju's voice grew dangerous. Let's say that again. You think I used him? Genju's voice grew dangerously quiet. You think I profited from him somehow? Let me give you your first lesson, the same one I gave you. He stamped his foot, and a thick layer of soil clamped itself over Kyoshi's mouth, a muzzle with no holes for her to breathe. She began to choke on her own element, her lungs clogging with grit. Genju swept his arm behind him in a wide, encompassing arc. Out there is an entire nation crammed full of corrupt, incompetent people who will try to use the Avatar for their own purposes. Buffoons who call themselves sages, when all it takes in the Earth Kingdom is having the right connections and paying enough gold to plaster such a title on your brow. The map of Kyoshi's vision curled in on itself. Her toes gouged furrows in the dirt, trying to push her body toward air. The pounding in her head threatened to burst her skull. I read ahead. I keep doing that. Stop. Without my influence, you'd turn into nothing more than a traveling peddler of favors, flopping here and there with your decisions, squandering your authority on petty boons and handouts, Genju said, unconcerned that she was losing consciousness before his eyes. You'd end up a living party trick. A bender who can shoot water and breathe fire and spit useless advice. A girl who paints the walls a pretty color while the house rots at its foundations. She barely made out Genju crouching down beside her, bringing his lips close to her ear. I have dedicated my life to making sure the next Avatar won't be used in such a manner, he whispered. And despite your every attempt to fight me, I will dedicate my life to you, Kyoshi. He suddenly ripped away the earthen gag. The rush of air into her lungs felt like knives. She collapsed onto her chest, her hands freed but useless. For several minutes she lay there, despising each pathetic gulp she took. Each time she tried to stand but could not. Finally, she heaved herself to her feet, only to see Genju backing away from her, glancing over her head. A gale of wind washed them in dust and desiccated leaves. Kelsang landed on his glider on the slope and slid down on his feet the rest of the way. Relieved as she was to see him, Kyoshi knew right away that he shouldn't have come. Oh, hon, his wounds had reopened, staining his bandages red. I'm so stressed. Ah! He'd traveled too far on his own without his bison. Ugh! Ah! The journey by glider would have been arduous for an airbender at full health. How did you find us? Genju said. Kelsang closed the wings on his staff. They'd been repaired so hastily that they wouldn't fold completely into the wood, lumps of glue sticking out at the seams. He leaned heavily on it for support, staring hard at Genju the whole time. You left a map out on your desk. I thought I locked my study. You did. Genju's composure broke fully for the first time today. Really, Kel? His nickname is Kel. Sorry. Really, Kel, he shouted. You think so little of me these days that you panicked when I took the Avatar on a trip by myself and broke into my room? I can't trust the people closest to me anymore. He is one to talk. I can't even. Kyoshi wanted to run to Kelsang, hide behind his robes, and sob like a child, but fear had closed her throat and glued her feet. She felt like the slightest word from her could prove to be a spark thrown on the oil. She didn't have to say anything, though. Kelsang took one look at her trembling form and grimaced. He stepped carefully between her and Genju, leveling his staff at his old friend. It looked much more like a weapon than a crutch now. No one in the house could tell me where you went. Rangi and Heidan included, he said to Genju. You're saying I had no reason to be suspicious? Where's Yoon? Kelsang, Genju said, thrusting his hands toward Kyoshi, trying to get his friend to see the bigger picture. That girl is the Avatar. I saw her firebend with my own eyes. Your hunch was correct. After so many years, we found the Avatar. Kelsang hitched, his body processing the revelation. But if Genju thought he could distract the monk to his advantage, he was mistaken. Where is Yoon? He repeated. Dead, Genju said, giving up the ruse. We tried to commune with the spirit, but it went berserk. It took him. I'm sorry. No! Kyoshi shrieked. She couldn't let that go. She couldn't let him twist what happened. You fed us to it. You threw Yoon to that spirit like meat to a wolf. You murdered him. You're right to be upset, Kyoshi, Genju said softly. I got so carried away with finding the Avatar that I lost my pupil. Yoon's death is my fault. I'll never forgive myself for this accident. He wasn't wailing with sorrow. That would have been too obvious an act. He kept the face that most people knew, the stoic, plain-speaking teacher. This was a game to him, with Kelsang as the piece in the center. Kyoshi was gripped by a fresh bout of despair. If the monk believed his friend, the adult, the man of good repute, over her, Genju's crime would be buried along with Yoon. She needn't have worried. Kyoshi, Kelsang said, never taking his staff off Genju. Stay behind me. Genju rolled his eyes, his ploy having failed. I don't know what's going on here, Kelsang said, but I'm taking Kyoshi, and we're leaving. He staggered, still weak from his injuries. She caught him by the shoulders and tried to keep him upright. The only way they could keep stable was by holding on to each other. Look at the two of you, Genju said. What you're doing is you're coming home with me. Neither of you are in any shape to argue. Kelsang felt Kyoshi tremble through her hand on his back, felt her fear. He ignored his own pain and drew up to his full height. You will have nothing to do with Kyoshi for the remainder of your life, he said. You are no longer fit to serve the Avatar. The cut landed deep on Genju. Where will you go? He roared, frenzied and frothing. Where? The air temples? The abbots will hand her back to me before you can finish telling your story. Have you forgotten how far you've fallen into disgrace with them? Didn't Tagaka jog your memory? Kelsang tensed into a solid carving of himself. The grain of his staff squeaked from how tightly he held it. I know everyone in the 4 nations who could possibly help you, Genju said. I put out the message, and every lawman, every sage, every official will be tripping over their own feet to hunt you down on my behalf. Being the Avatar will not protect her from me. Kyoshi, run! Kelsang shouted. He pushed her away and leaped at Genju, bringing his staff down to create a gale of wind. Genju brought earth up to meet him. But they weren't fighting the same fight. Oh my God. Kelsang meant to blast his friend away, to knock the madness out of him, to overwhelm him with the least amount of harm done in the way of all air nomads. Genju shaved off a razor of flint no longer than an inch, sharp and thin enough to pass through the wind without resistance and slice at where his victim was exposed and vulnerable. A spurt of blood came from the side of Kelsang's neck. From a finger-length cut so clean and precise, it was almost elegant. Genju's expression flickered with a sadness that was deeper and truer than what he'd given to Yoon as he watched his friend fall. Kelsang collapsed to the ground, his head bouncing lifelessly off the hard-packed earth. Those were the last things Kyoshi saw before the white glow behind her eyes took over her entire being. And that is the end of the chapter. Woo! What? Pardon? What? What did I just read? Water. This whole area is like shaking. I think just from the intensity with which I was enunciating. So Yoon, and I had read a spoiler that Yoon died, but I thought this wouldn't be it. I thought it would have something to do with Tagaka or something. Oh my God. I'm sorry, I'm so, all right, recap folks, here we go. Oh God, I'm shaking. I'm literally shaking. So I can't. Can I do this? Can I relive this? So the chapter begins, and Genju is taking them somewhere remote. Just the three of them, Yoon, Kyoshi, and Genju. And they're like, are we going to work on the avatar state? And Kyoshi's like, what's the avatar state? And Genju is like, no, because that's too crazy. So they get there and they're going to talk to this. I was barely paying attention to the whole eyeball thing because I was so grossed out and I was trying to just get through it and read it. So long story short, there's this big spirit that's like an eyeball and it's disgusting. Genju drugs Kyoshi and Yoon so that they can't move anywhere. They meet this spirit because he asks which one of them is the avatar. But the spirit is like, I demand, thank you, Father Glowworm, thank you. I demand payment for that information, blah, blah, blah. And so he's like, I need their blood. And it's unclear. I'm not going to go back and read it right now because I'm traumatized. It's unclear exactly how he needed their blood. I don't think the spirit didn't need to kill them. I think it just needed to kind of wound them a bit and then was it sucking their blood? I don't know. I heard the word taste. But Yoon is he's not immune to poison. He's like that guy in the Princess Bride who's like, I've been building up an immunity. What's his face? Wesley? Dread Pirate Roberts. As You Wish guy. Anyways, so Yoon, poison training. Go off. And then the eye is like, Kyoshi's the avatar. And then Kyoshi, even though she can't move, she sees that Yoon is disappointed that she's the avatar. He said he wouldn't be, but that was a lie. He was just trying to be supportive. He was so disappointed. He really thought it was him. He didn't even think that it wouldn't be him. But Yoon fought back against the spirit because the spirit was attacking them. And so then the spirit was like, you're going to fight against me? All right, well, I'm going to kill one of you then. And so then Genju protects Kyoshi. And Yoon just gets like yeeted into the mountain. And apparently dies. And Kyoshi, she screamed pure fire. So she does one of those like, ah! And it's like fire. And Genju is just, in no time at all, he just was like, sucks to suck. You're the avatar, and now you're my priority. Like, what kind of two-timing? I'm not going to curse on these live streams, but oh boy, oh boy, oh boy. Laji. That means trash. Laji 老师, Laji 师傅. 他是垃圾师傅. He's a trash 师傅. Oh, that's where Sifu is based off of. 师傅. I get that now. So then Kyoshi's mad as poop. And she starts to try to fight Genju. I'm so stressed. I can barely like get through this recap. But it doesn't work. And he's trying to convince her that everything's fine. She's trying to firebend at him, but like she can't because that was all she could do. And he like puts shackles on her wrists and stuff. And he calls Yoon that little swindler. 2 years of training him. Yoon idolized him. Kyoshi says, how could you say that? He worshipped you and you used him. Genju tries to justify it. He's choking her on earth, on dirt. And then finally, Kelsang shows up because he trapped them there. I'm so stressed. They argue a bit. Genju lies and says that the spirit went crazy. Like, we don't know what happened. Yoon died. The spirit went crazy. And Kyoshi's like, no, it didn't. Like, you sacrificed us. Both. Like, because honestly, he would have, if the spirit had said that Yoon was the avatar, Genju would have just been like, all right, go eat Kyoshi. That's fine. Like, he does not care. Oh my God. And then Kelsang is like, do not touch her. And he's like, where are you going to take her? Huh? The air nomads hate you, and I am friends with like everyone, everywhere, and so I can make your life horrific. And then he's like, Kyoshi, run. And they both fight at the same time. As a true airbender, air nomad, Kelsang just shoots wind at him to try to knock him away. And Genju shoots like a dagger of earth at him, and it gets him in the neck. And then Kelsang dies. And then the last thing that happens in the chapter is that Kyoshi, well, I'll just read the last line. These were the last things that Kyoshi saw before the white glow behind her eyes took over her entire being. And that's the end of the chapter. I'm just that was so much. That was so much. I know, Yoon died so abruptly. I didn't even pause there because I thought they were going to fix it. Someone said I should record the audiobook. I'd have to read it like 5 times before I could record it so that I'm not as emotional. The thing is that Genju in his own twisted way legitimately cares for Kelsang and Kyoshi. In his own twisted way. God, Avatar State, yip. Kelsang, you were my brother, Genju! I loved you! My allegiance is to democracy! FCE. I want to file a complaint. Genju is probably my favorite ATLA verse villain. Well, now and I knew he was morally gray a little bit, especially since Tagaka, when she talked about that thing, and the way he justified it, he was like, they were criminals, and it's like, so you did bury them alive, without a fair trial, like, you know, and just waiting for Kyoshi to beat up Genju. Aren't we all? 2 whales, they're friends. Maybe they're girlfriends. They're married, actually. They're wives. They're married. What are their names? Tway and La? Can you show us comic books? I can. I'll be right back. Do you want me to go grab one? I'm gonna grab one of the comic books. BRB. I'm back. I showed this at one of the first live streams back when I used to do them in my room. She talks about how the air nomads are really accepting. The water tribe is kind of just like mind your business. That's their philosophy towards gay rights. how the Fire Nation used to be accepting, but Sozin was homophobic, and so now they have more homophobic policies, and that the Earth Kingdom is also rigid. And this is the part where it confirms that Kyoshi is bi before this even came out. It said, even Avatar Kyoshi, who by all accounts loved both men and women, was unable to effect any real progress. Really, the air nomads are the only ones who really said gay rights, and then the Water Tribe said, gay rights if you mind your business. And then we hate Sozin. Someone said Sozin was just mad Roku rejected him, and that is the tea. That is the tea. That is the tea. The tea is piping hot today. Water Tribe said don't ask, don't tell. They really did. I've been procrastinating doing my overdue schoolwork to watch this stream. Well, I'm gonna end it soon. Honestly, I'm procrastinating doing my overdue schoolwork. High five, Theo. Oh God, all right, we need to get off this.